I think a lot of people are stuck in the mindset that they have to build everything themselves. But what if your job is just to design the outcome and hire people to execute the steps? That's basically how I see digital products working. You don't need to be a coder, designer, or editor. You just need to think clearly and know how to lead. Does the idea of having more or less other people do stuff for you sound like something that you would do, or does it sort of trigger some sort of logical red flags?
I'm going to be honest and say that I personally believe that there is a almost trajectory for this or level up for this where if I don't know enough about it, then I don't feel comfortable outsourcing it yet. However, once I think almost like the heuristic that comes to mind right now, and I'm speaking like theoretically here because I don't have the experience, but it feels almost like when it starts to get boring, then that's exactly a time when I would want to outsource it, because that means that I already know everything about it. Before that, I don't feel comfortable outsourcing it.
Okay, I see. So basically you're saying that you want to sort of see what the working parts are and what you're working with, and maybe try it out for yourself and then go from there. So that makes sense to me. What I've found with other founders, and myself included, it is that I find myself burning out when I'm doing mundane tasks or repetitive tasks, or I guess you could call them low leverage tasks. I feel that the real power comes from the ability to delegate, the ability to direct, and following through with those. And on top of that, as I've mentioned many times before, building systems is very important to me. It's something that I find to be very useful. So if you build the system, you now own the system. So you have control of the system. So what I would say to you is, let's say you had a concept for a system, but you didn't want to do all the manual work. How would you approach it, or how would you approach building it efficiently, if efficiently is even a word that you would consider? And also, would outsourcing even interest you, or would you rather create everything from scratch just to be able to understand it?
So I almost start out assuming that I know nothing about what is needed and what the solution actually is. So it might differ based on how far we've come along to know what is actually needed in the solution. Because one reason why I would prefer, to answer your question directly, I would prefer to build out the things myself is because it sounds like the lowest commitment way to find out what we actually need. So let's say there is some problem out there. Okay, I'm going to build one thing and see how it looks like against the problem. I'll add 3 or 4 or 5 more things. And this is what they talk about with MVP, right? With just out there in the startup world. I want the agility. This is my perspective. I want the agility to be able to put those in there and then find out what the customer actually thinks about those, and then use that feedback loop to know what to do next. I personally believe that at that point, planning and vision, these things are. It seems too early. It seems too early for that. I'm speaking almost from the idea stage. That's where I think being hands-on and iterating really fast makes a lot more sense than outsourcing.
Okay, so you mentioned creating an MVP, and I don't disagree with you there. That's something that's quite a standard these days, especially with startups, especially with software. But when I hear even that, I'm thinking, okay, we don't actually have to talk just about outsourcing, but would you not find it to be easier to create that MVP if you were working, collaborating with 2 or 3 other people?
Yes. However, I understand. I personally feel that this is speaking somewhat to my own thought process and brain, where the thing that really gets me to know what is possible and what to do next is having created one iteration. My brain is quite iterative in nature, and so I only know what the next possible model of something is if I've made model 1. And so that's generally kind of how I approach anything I do. I think I saw something saying before, get it done first so that you can like perfect it later. I very much adhere to that. I wish to see something so that I know what to do next. Which I wonder, just to shoot it back at you, I wonder if you also somewhat want to do that at some points, at times, where you don't know what to do next unless you see what this approach is going to look like.
Yes. So that sounds like me going through things step by step, which is what I do tend to do. I do generally try to plan ahead though. So while I am only working on one segment at any given time, I do tend to plan pretty, like if it's an MVP, something really small, I will have planned out the entire framework first of all, and then I will execute step by step. However, what I will say is I do not need to execute those steps on my own. I can hire somebody to do that for me. And that's what I'm getting at with outsourcing. If it's something that I know what the result I'm looking for, if I know that I can, let's say there's 5 segments and I can work on a segment on my own and have 1 or 2 other people working on the remaining segments. And I'll get to the goal faster than I would doing it myself. And I still have full control over the outcome because I can still manage those people. So in the name of continuing the conversation, leaning towards outsourcing, because that's the topic that I brought up, I'm just going to talk more now about how I would handle the things I just mentioned as far as building a funnel here. So the point that I'm trying to make is I just talked just now about segments and about doing things piece by piece, but actually what I really am trying to get at here is that I think it's more important for me to build a funnel rather than building the pieces themselves. So a funnel as a concept is, for example, a lead magnet, a low-cost tripwire, the core offer, or let's say I'm trying to upsell or I'm trying to sell subscriptions. The execution of all of those things can be outsourced, and so those are the types of things that, first of all, like, for example, lead magnets. Yeah, I could do that, but I'm sure there are people who are more versed in the marketing or sales realm that can handle that better. And so I would just outsource that particular step to someone else. What I would like to do is actually sort of talk about how I would handle things regarding software. So design, for example. I can design, I can create. So we talked about a vision just now, but a vision is in my head. But sometimes it's actually really difficult to even create the initial design. And I think that working next to someone else, so while this is technically outsourcing, but also still technically me having a hand in it, is I can outsource that design work on Fiverr, for example, or on, I think it's called Upwork and freelancer.com, these types of places. And I can work next to a designer without actually, I don't have to hire somebody permanently. That's kind of the point here. So while I don't know the true definition of outsourcing, but to me that's outside of where I'm working, so it's still sourcing the help from an outsider, right? And so the same thing, if I need copy written, I can use Upwork. If I have back-end code, honestly, I can outsource that not to a person, but I can use no-code tools. I can use AI, or I can use a developer. But when it comes to the strategy, that is where only I can handle that, and only I would handle that. The way I describe this, let's say the funnel itself, do you think of it more as a machine or a set of logical rules? And would you map this out? I know you like to map things out, but I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, with like a flow chart, or where do you think most people would get the system I've described incorrect?
So I first want to talk to what you're talking about here, which is, I see it's almost like another valid approach towards doing this kind of work, where it's almost like you are leveraging people's time and skills to accomplish something as efficiently as possible, and while you are keeping track of what actually needs to be made, which is, I think it's a beautiful way to do it. And it's not one that I would naturally lean towards, I think, because I think I tend to view these things growing organically, where the next thing to make is discovered as opposed to planned. So speaking to that, I see some excellent like pros in the way that you're talking about this and approaching it, because I see a lot of ways that it could save like waste, save wasteful movement, because you already know what you're going to do, and so you're going to move towards that. The only issue that I personally have is so much of it seems simply unproven. It's like the quote by Mike Tyson comes to mind, which is, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, which means like, okay, yeah, you're going to build this beautiful system, and still reality might still prove it to be wrong or extraneous. There are parts of it that aren't necessary. There are parts of it that are just, that were beautiful, that sounded really cool to make, but they weren't necessary. And thus, that's why I tend to have this default, like I won't need it, and until reality will show me I need it, then I'll add it in. And so I almost have like, the image that comes to mind here, the way that I see something versus the way you see it is I think you tend to view it as a structure to be built. I view it as like almost like an organism that's growing onto like the side of a mountain. And the parts of the mountain that are fertile, it'll stay. The parts that aren't, it'll die.
I don't know what it is, but the ability to see ahead and sort of have a good idea of what I need in order to complete something is something that I'm good at doing, and I do it naturally. Strategizing and executing on the strategy. However, that's not bereft of issues. Of course, if there's something that doesn't go right, so you basically are saying, how do you know you need it? How do you know, like, what if you get punched in the face? That happens all the time. So in those cases, that's where you have to know how to roll with the punches, so to speak. And I talked about this in another video, basically how to constantly be reassessing the system, constantly be reassessing at each level of the project, let's call it, that you're working on, and noticing where there are problems and solving them right away. Don't just put them on a backlog. Solve things as you go, and be willing to pivot or to deviate from the original vision or plan. And this is also very important. And this is where what you said comes into play. While I'm still not doing what you're saying, I'm not really experimenting or just creating things as I need them. I'm creating what's on the list until I hit a barrier, and then I handle that barrier. And I feel like I can handle that astutely with the experiences that I've gained through all the failures or trials and tribulations I've had in creating previous systems. So this is, I left that out in my examples. So with outsourcing, there's a lot of risk there too. There's a lot of risk in not getting what I want from them. And I'm understanding this as well. But for me, it's more efficient, and it's easier for me to see if things are going the way they should be when I have less work to do. The more free my brain is to do what I'm good at, the more powerful I am in my position. So what's the opposite of that? Let's say I'm handling everything myself. Currently, I'm working for a startup. I'm working with this podcast. I'm doing a YouTube channel. I'm doing all kinds of other small projects, and I'm trading, and I do a lot of different things. But that has caused me to sometimes mix things together or not be able to sort of see what's in front of me, or I can't see that many steps ahead. And so that's a perfect example of showing why, at least showing you an example of me being much weaker when I'm trying to do multiple things at one time.
As I was listening to your approach, I thought about almost the end goal, the aim of what you're trying to do, as opposed to what I'm trying to do. And I see almost like a different kind of efficiency between us. Whereas, if I may apply an analogy here, I think about your approach as almost being a general contractor for a house. The cheapest or like the most economical way to build the house is to use the blueprint that has already been used before. And if you just follow those rules, then you're going to get a great house. You're going to get a pretty good house. I mean, you're also going to inherit the issues with that house, sure. But you're going to get a house. Whereas if you approach building a house with my mindset, you might end up with a house, but each house is going to be slightly different. And each house is going to be it's just going to depend on, there's going to be quite a bit of chance introduced there. And I think my approach might be more useful in a world that would benefit from flexibility, whereas, for the exact example of building houses, that flexibility is probably not the value you want to maximize.
So I find it fascinating that you didn't hear any flexibility in how I explained that. So like you said, I would if something works, I don't see any need to fix it. However, if something goes wrong, or let's say the plan no longer really fits, or if I have a client that wants something a little different, I feel I have the ability to give them that because I've already built a really strong system that I can now change to fit that person, but that specific person. And so I hope that I didn't come off as if I'm just always following the same set of rules. That's why I said you have to constantly be assessing. As I'm building each house, I'm not just defaulting to the original blueprint because that to me sounds very foolish. That sounds like, well, it worked before, it's going to work now. I feel it with every step of the way, though, every step of the way, not the smallest, most minute things. Someone should be accountable. And there should be an amount of trust there. You're trusting that person. Since I'm the contractor, I have subcontractors, and they know how to do their jobs. So as long as they're following the blueprints and following what the client's asking for, which would be my job. Yeah, sure. My job is to make sure that I'm telling the subcontractor, well, actually, we need to change this because the client asked for this. So I would be willing to make those changes. But I certainly wouldn't just build each house and, step by step and just hope it works. But I still think that's a really great analogy, so I really like that. So as someone who thinks namely in outcomes, I'm not interested in tinkering. I'm not interested in experimenting. I'm more interested in leverage. So back to the creating a web page analogy, I'd rather hire a skilled person to execute or create something than me spending 10 hours figuring out how to build a page or edit a video, for example. I do these things. That's what I'm doing currently. But I certainly would rather hire someone else to do that because it would save time and allow me to execute more quickly and move and create more iterations. You gave an analogy. What was it? Something like, you gave an analogy. Let's say you were renting a podcast studio, and if you only recorded one time in a month versus recording 100 or 1,000 times, the more times you record, the cheaper that podcast studio becomes. If you were working with someone like me, what role do you think you would naturally fill? So in my system or in my company, let's call it. And what's your ideal function in a system like this? Would it be refining the system, testing it, challenging assumptions, or something else?
Okay, so engaging my imagination, I believe the best way that we would work together is if we are both aware of the end goal that we have in mind. So, for example, let's imagine we're both working in AI and we want to create super intelligence. That's the aim. Okay, now I'm going to tinker in that direction. And, well, also, of course, accomplish road goals along that direction as well. And you can be laying out the timeline and things like that. And what I also think is amazing in the way that you think is with your perspective, you are able to engage. When we talk about leverage, I also see in leverage the parallel ability to assign tasks to various different people and understand when those will be done because they've been given a timeline and a schedule, and we've coordinated everything so that we know that today is being used by 20 different teams. 20 times the output is happening today. That's what I see as a great advantage in what you do, whereas for me, that would be a lot of crossed wires, I think, in my head. But I see my role as being that person who is seeing what we're moving forward in, we're moving forward in the path towards what we're accomplishing. However, I think my view is one of this is just one path of many we could take. and I'm keeping my eye out towards the flexible, the knobs, the ways that we can flex this, so that if there is anything we want to do in the future, then I understand that there is a way we can do that. I feel that's one of my strengths, which is in every choice I make, there were 20 other things that I could possibly have done, and I'm aware of all those things all the time. Which is also somewhat what causes me to not be so decisive in what path I'm going. It's just, it's one path for now. That's kind of how I generally choose paths. And so, yeah.
But in this scenario, you've chosen at least a somewhat open path, which is we're building a super AI. So that's enough, right? And I imagine someone like myself who knows how to delegate and knows to whom I'm delegating certain responsibilities, knows what type of person you are, knows what your strengths are, and then I would, quote unquote, I know the word assign is also not the word you want to hear, but I would make sure that you are the one that I need, challenging my assumptions, challenging or looking for different options when we need them. Because that happens a lot. Sometimes you just get stuck, and like even I, with my infinite wisdom and strategizing, can't see a way out of things. That's where you might be like, yeah, well, have you tried these other 5 things that I happen to have laying right here that I've already explored? And that's when it would be invaluable. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is design a funnel right here now. Let's pretend that we're launching, I don't know, a YouTube channel, and we want to create video podcasts for people to watch. So how do we approach that? How do we build that? How do we sell this? And so looking at what the things that we have to do now versus what we could be outsourcing. So that's what I wanted to do, since that's been the topic for today. So what are some of the things we need? So we want to sketch out a strategy, and we need to figure out I don't know what word to use, create an audience. You don't create an audience, use something an audience. Do we create a landing page, and what is the product? Before I lay out how I would approach this, I would like to ask you, how would you map out this funnel like a logical system, and where would you test variables or try wild experiments?
Well, I'll be honest that generally the ways that I would naturally want to build this out would require very little outsourcing and delegation. However, if I were for example, if I were a podcast host who had guests, for example, and I needed a roster of guests with a decent amount of following, or else they're not allowed or something, or I'm building this out, right? That is one place that I can totally imagine I would outsource. I would hire someone to handle the itinerary, the travel, the dress, just the contact and the what do you call it? The warming up, so that these people become guests on my show. That's one place that I would want to not have to deal with all the time. However, okay, so let's just totally imagine that I went down the path that requires a lot of moving parts like that, like a video podcast, and I have a roster of guests. I would personally start out by cold calling and cold emailing a whole lot of people to just want to come onto my show. As the audience grows, perhaps the demand for people coming in grows, and then inbound contacts grow, and that becomes too much. Then I would bring in someone to answer that, or maybe I would use some kind of tool for that. That's an example of like high demand requiring me to outsource that, because it's just overloaded. On top of that, maybe the other menial tasks that come with this person, for example, their travel, their dress, as well as doing the required research and coming up with the questions that I'm going to ask them. These things are all things that I can see other people could help me a lot in doing. So these things that will always be there as a workload, I can definitely see myself offloading that onto tools and other people. That being said, this is not what, like, practically speaking, this is not the path that I would personally choose for my own personal podcast. I don't want to have that many moving parts. That's me speaking.
So ideally, you would probably simplify things more, but just for the sake of argument, you have basically reiterated what you said previously, which is as you do it, you adapt. As you become overloaded with one thing, you hire someone to alleviate that particular area, and you continue to move forward or in a direction or many directions until you meet another, let's call it an impedance or a throttle, if you will. And then your goal is probably to just get rid of any bottlenecks. And so you would hire as you see fit. So you would still be outsourcing in that case, in this fake scenario, but you would handle it slightly differently.
Yes.
I would do a lot of the same things. I would just plan ahead, really. And there's a lot of guesswork there. So you could argue that the efficiency in yours is in that you only use what's needed when needed, whereas I try to plan for all of that and adapt as needed. So there's still adaptation happening in both of our scenarios. However, first of all, I'm thinking more about sales. I'm thinking more about making money and revenue more so. I didn't hear that mentioned at all in your scenario, which is fascinating and also insightful. So I'll just sort of really quickly say how I would handle this. For me, it's like I think about all of the flashy things that you probably don't care about, which is what types of thumbnails speak to people and get people to click. Because to me, first of all, you have impressions, sure, but click-through rates are important. So how can let's say I'm working at a 0.2% click-through rate, how can I up that to 1%, 2%, 5%, and so on? These are things that I can't plan for right away. So those are things I would adapt for along the way. Titles, descriptions, even small things as far as aesthetic things or psychological things that are occurring while I'm recording. Maybe it's just the way I'm looking at the camera. Maybe it's the types of clothes I wear. Maybe it's the lighting. Maybe it's the way I'm positioned. Or maybe it's the way I talk. Maybe I'm talking over people. Or maybe I'm mansplaining too much. Or maybe my voice is not very friendly and that's something people don't like. Or maybe they prefer the sort of clinical way that I speak sometimes. So these are a lot of different factors that I would try to think ahead of time or do some research about. I will try one path, one way, but then I will adapt as I go. And if I get feedback loops we talk about a lot, the more feedback I get, the more I'm able to now reevaluate. So constantly reassessing, constantly looking at the analytics and all the numbers. I love numbers. I love looking at numbers, and I love raising them or lowering them as necessary. That's fun. That's fun for me. That's exciting. And I would build other structures, or I would figure out ways to create systems that would sell this for me. So back to the outsourcing aspect of this, video editing. It's very time consuming, especially for a novice like myself. I have years of experience and I'm still a novice. I could outsource that, get it done really quickly. I don't have to think about it anymore. Now I have more free time to think about the content that I'm trying to come across, or just generally frees my mind subconsciously to just breathe fresh air and come up with even more inspirational or even more inspiring, or I guess that's the same word. I don't know, just to really kind of let the inner workings of my brain leak out naturally. And so same thing with selling. I'm really not that good at marketing. So I would love to have someone who can market for me, who can do my social media for me, et cetera, et cetera. So I would already be looking to do those things. In a perfect world with a limitless budget, I would invest in all of those things extremely heavily from the get-go. So basically my role is to see the finish line and remove everything that gets in the way. So I'm more or less, there's a vision, but there's all these obstacles in the way. It's the same with, life is like that, right? And so I'm trying to perceive those obstacles ahead of time. So I don't need to build, I need to orchestrate. Whereas I feel that you are more likely to, as the obstacles come, you just deal with them one by one.
I think the way I work is one of the biggest things that I dislike is thoughtless action, and like one way you can, and perhaps you can tell me that this is different from the idea of, there are two words that I can think of right now, is over-engineering and cargo culting. So what I hear in some of the things that are said here is decisions made based on no real world evidence. And that is what I personally aim to see as soon as possible, which is like what's actually happening. Let's see, and then we can decide. And I think that I do see the value in what you're saying, which I brought up before, which is that as you're building out almost a product, the product allows you to gain economies of scale because you've already decided that before, and so you don't have to think about it again. However, what my pushback is like, okay, but do we even need that? Is there any like actual proof that we needed that in the first place? So that's like, I can see like a separation between our approaches to things.
If you're someone who wants to build a product but hates the idea of doing it all yourself, think like a strategist. Lead the project, don't be the project.